and I signed up.
There's some of those that I,
For my ballot.
yeah.
Getting more and more.
Passed. I signed up as Steve, but this time I signed up as Steven.
You know
Like you signed up for an absentee ballot?
what their party wants.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, when you just signed your name?
need to be an individual.
Registered to
Oh,
be a candidate,
okay.
but
And that's why.
people know me as Steve.
Morning, JJ.
Sure hope.
Good morning.
You think
Oh, what's happening?
lightning?
Just the morning check of epilepsy. It's fine.
So it looks gorgeous there.
Is Reese gonna be here?
Oh, look at that.
Oh, you know what? They're in Chicago.
Oh,
At least as of this morning, they were in Chicago, so I don't think he's gonna make it.
okay.
We're cutting
Oh,
into his
there's
fishing.
the-
Handle all
It's
this
camping.
Sure,
question.
why not?
Why not?
Looks like he's really rough with it.
I know. It doesn't look like you're really seriously camping, Dave.
I had to break away to come where I could get high-speed internet. Because it doesn't run to the campsite. But I will say, we were in the lake this morning at 6:15 for the polar bear swim. So if anyone wants to
gosh.
join me, it's a hard life.
Polar bear swim. And he's got on a I don't think I've ever seen you in a t-shirt. Nice.
That looks good.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like you're having fun.
I am.
Good. JJ,
I like JJ's background better though.
your scenery is gorgeous. What part of
Yeah,
Alaska are you
nice.
in?
We're in Valdez.
Perfect.
Are you fishing?
Yeah, fishing and then helping a friend work on a apartment building up here.
Yes.
What's the weather like?
Well, typical day, cloudy, rainy,
Yeah.
but it eased up
Oh,
now.
Valdez. Well, it is 10 o'clock, so we will begin. The Pine County Commissioner JJ Weltham will be attending the board meeting of today by interactive technology. Commissioner Weltham will be seen and heard via electronic means and participate from 315 Aspen Circle. I'm sure the crowd has rolled in there, JJ, to be part of this. Something we have to say. So with that, we will call the meeting to order and rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And today, Kelly Schroeder will be our administrator, but David Minke has called in. So he will be available if we need to ask him anything. At this point, public forum, anybody wish to speak at public forum? Now is your chance. Looks like they're flocked in for that also. If not, we'll move on to the agenda. We do have some changes. Kelly, you want to mention those?
Sure. So for the consent agenda, for item A, adding or to the consent agenda, item 5.1, adding an emergency management performance grant, approval of that grant in the amount of $21,783. Adding consent item number 8.1, the promotion of 6 part-time correction officers to full-time. And then on consent item A, 4 is just adding Commissioner Waldhelm's expense forms from March to July.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
so I would like to pull the AED donation for consent, just so we can recognize that. And I don't know where you want to put it on the, and maybe the sheriff can speak to that when we get to it.
That's Let's put it,
Regular.
right before budget talks, 3A.
Okay.
Okay.
3A.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
right.
Yep, thank you.
Was that a motion then to
And I will move as amended.
the agenda?
I'll second. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Okay, we got a motion by Ludwig, seconded by Moore. Any discussion? If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District one, Chair Holland.
Yes.
District two, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
District three, Commissioner Lundgren.
Aye.
District four, Commissioner Waldner.
Yes.
District five, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
Thank you.
We'll look for approval of the minutes of August 2nd, 2022 County Board meeting and summary for publications.
Make a motion to accept those.
I'll second.
The motion by Lovegren, second by Ludwig. Any discussion? If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District two, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
District three, Commissioner Lundgren.
Aye.
District four, Commissioner Waldham.
Yes.
District five, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
District one, Chair Holland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Minutes, boards, reports and correspondence. We got the city Sandstone annual disclosure of tax increment district year ending December 31st, 21, and the city Pine City annual disclosure of tax increment for December 31st, 2021.
Ludwig will move. I'll second.
Got a motion by Ludwig, seconded by Moore. Any discussion? If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District three, Commissioner Lundgren.
Aye.
District four, Commissioner Waldham.
Yes.
District five, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
District one, Chair Holland.
Yes.
District two, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the consent agenda. Had that in front of you for a while.
I'll move the consent agenda, the changes.
I'll second it.
Motion by Moore, second by Lovegren to approve the consent agenda as amended. Any discussion? If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District four, Commissioner Waldham.
Yes.
District five, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
District one, Chair Holland.
Yes.
District two, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
District three, Commissioner Lundgren.
Aye.
Thank you.
And that brings us up to the regular agenda, Facilities Committee report.
I can take that, JJ. if
Yep.
you want.
Yep.
Okay. Yes, we had our meeting on August 3rd. SWCD, Paul Swanson was there. And he approached us saying that he would like to do some rain garden and some demonstration things here at the facilities around here. So when people come and they have to do work on a site to stop erosion and stuff, they can have a model for them to look at and say, this is how it'll look. So it's like a thing. So he just wanted permission to do that. So we said, yeah. And if you want to do something in Pine City, you can do it there, do it. The buildings, right, it's to the south end. So
That's nice.
that was interesting. Yeah, and then we had an update on our Willow River Household Hazardous Waste Building. And that should be substantially completed by September 6th. So I think you guys had a save the date thing there on that one. And the snow removal contract was awarded, and they're gonna just go for the lowest responsible bidder for a 2-year thing for $38,000. So with that, I would like to move that.
I'll second that.
Motion by Ludwig, second by Lovegren to approve the Facilities Committee report. Including the awarding of the contract for snowplow removal to Premier Outdoor Services. Any discussion?
There was one more thing that we did, Phase did not accept it to do the mowing at the gun range, so the sheriff's office is gonna have to figure out some other
Okay,
lawn mowing. I know we discussed it last time.
any more discussion? If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District 5, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
District 1, Chair Holland.
Yes,
District 2, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
District 3, Commissioner Lundgren.
Aye.
District 4, Commissioner Waldham.
Yes.
Thank you.
move on to the Personnel Committee minute, report with the minutes attached.
Let me take that or?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll fill in.
Yeah, we had a meeting August 8th, and we had the following recommendations. Pine County Sheriff's Office Jail. Acknowledge the following and approve backfill positions and any subsequent vacancies that may occur due to the internal promotion or lateral transfer. Resignation of part-time corrections officer Amanda Torgensen, effective July 19th, 2022. Retirement of corrections officer, jail transport officer Larry Pagonis, effective September 3rd, 2022. Retirement of part-time jail matron Heidi Pagonis, effective September 3rd, 2022. Resignation of part-time corrections officer Chase Eplector, effective August 17, 2022. Resignation of jail systems coordinator Ashley Ludke, effective September 9, 2022. Should we do one at a time or you want to do it all?
I think we can do it all.
Okay. In probation, acknowledge the resignation of senior corrections agent Christopher Stolen, effective September 1st, 2022. Approve backfill of the position and any subsequent vacancies that may occur due to internal promotion or lateral transfer. And works, acknowledge the resignation of highway maintenance worker Chris Rushline, effective July 29, 2022, and approve backfill of the position. Any subsequent vacancies that may occur to internal promotion or lateral transfer. I'll make a motion to approve all that. I just had one comment. We did, almost every one of these is either, well, we got a couple retirements. One of the person or people were moving like out of state. Another one was taken like a promotion with a different organization. I think all but one just legitimately or quit.
So moving on.
I mean, it looks like a lot, but I just wanted to, that was one of the questions we asked is most of them were, retiring, moving up or moving to somewhere else. It wasn't like, it's a,
Mass quit.
yeah.
Mr. Chair, yeah, and we did, because JJ brought it up, I think, at one of the last board meetings too, so they are offering the exit interviews for employees, so it's really up to the employee to provide that feedback at the time. They're doing it. And I will second.
Motion by Moore, second by Ludwig. Any more discussion? If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District 1, Chair Holland.
Yes.
District 2, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
District 3, Commissioner Lundgren.
Aye.
District 4, Commissioner Waldham.
Yes.
District 5, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Within the Personnel Committee report, one thing that was discussed, and I don't know if you guys want to chime in, to let the full board know about one discussion point was the idea that Rod had brought forward with a incentive pay for mandatory overtime shifts for those shift workers. So it was an idea that Rod had brought forward, and I think you guys had asked for some more feedback and information on it. I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
Well, the reason I was brought up was because we were just offering one and there's no alternative. So maybe employees, but they always have a choice to go somewhere else if they want to. That's going to be what happens, right?
Are you talking about the incentive pay or
No, the Roth.
the Roth IRA?
Oh, no, I was talking about the incentive pay.
Oh, I thought you were saying the Roth.
No, the incentive piece.
Yeah, I guess we kind of took the action items and moved on, but the other thing that we did talk about was the incentive pay. So
Yeah.
within the jail, if you hit minimum staffing requirements, a lot of times people have to stay. You don't have a choice. You got to stay and work. So Rod is very creative, always has great ideas. Had said something because we're having such an issue hiring people, which everywhere. So one of the things he thought is to try to help the people that are here to not burn them out is add an incentive pay. And it is kind of progressive depending on how many hours you work over your normal shifts. So, and like he said, it isn't, if we can get maximum or get full staffs, we wouldn't be paying it out anyways, but it was just a little added, just to help people out to, hey, you got to stay an extra 4 hours. Here's a little stipend to add, as a little bit of appreciation. So they were going to explore that, see if that's something that would gain traction within the bargaining unit, and see if we could do it. And hopefully we hire a bunch of people like we just did and it offsets it anyways.
I think the important thing is they're not given, they're forced. It's a forced,
Right.
you're gonna stay and work because we're shorthanded. So that's important. And he really was creative with our work, I gotta say. So.
And it wasn't like if you volunteered, it wouldn't,
The thing is it's gonna take some union memorandum of understands and thing like that. I guess for the board is.
Am I understanding you correct that it's still in the exploratory?
Yes, because it's kind of hard to. I mean, I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep.
I think we're gonna bring it to our own committee again. So we just kind of threw it out there, but it's good for you guys to think about it too. And I thought, like Josh, it's not really an action item today, but. You can.
Mr. Chair?
Broke it down.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I could add just a little context, I think in the big picture, we know we have a challenge with staffing. We know that we have some employees who have the ability to work remote, and we have been a leader in allowing that remote work and in fact encouraging it so we didn't have to build an annex to the courthouse. We have other employees who must work a shift and have virtually no flexibility. And so I think Rod was trying to figure out, because we are short-staffed and he's having to force people to work overtime, and that's very hard on morale. Is there something we can do that helps show a level of appreciation for the work that's being done? And he came up with a proposal that went to the personnel committee. There was some discussion. The committee wanted to make sure that all commissioners had an opportunity to think about it and provide some feedback and be aware of it before any decisions were even recommended. And Rod is on the call and maybe can give a little bit of detail for the commissioners who weren't at the personnel committee to understand what the thinking is, if that would be helpful.
Ron, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. So as David spoke, we're trying to get creative in incentivizing our people to either pick up shifts or take on those extra shifts. We're having an enormous amount of forced overtime right now with our staffing levels being so short. The board may not know, but with the Department of Corrections, we have a mandatory minimum requirement of number of staff members that have to be on. So we can't fall below that, or otherwise our operation has to change dramatically. So in order to just fill minimum only, we wouldn't be anything scheduled out there or whatever. It would be minimum coverage only. We want to incentivize that. Kind of taken this model, I'd love to say that it came off my head, but it's being used a lot in the medical field right now. As I have a daughter in the medical field, and it's kind of where I got the idea. But we would be looking at something like if someone picks up an entire full shift, we're just throwing out a dollar amount right now, but that's up for discussion, but like a $200 incentive to pick up a full 12-hour shift. If it was an 8-hour shift, 8 to 12, we'd be looking at about $150, and then $100 incentive for anything that's 4 hours or more. Any of the short stuff, where they stay, they also get their overtime. So we'd be looking at that. I kind of have that laid out. Our staff's getting tired. They've been forced a lot since COVID. They understand the needs and they work hard at it. I just think this would be a good show of, hey, we hear you, we understand that you're having to be forced a lot, and we put this together. Again, if we're fully staffed and we're not having to force, it goes away all on its own. Do you have any questions?
Just a comment, I think it makes sense to me because it's a different animal than we have in other departments. Because the rules say we have to have X amount of people on staff during these hours. And so it's not like people are raising their hand and saying, I'll stay.
I have one more piece of information. I did run some preliminary numbers for the first half of this year, just to kind of get an idea of where we would be if we were to have implemented this at the first of the year. From January into the beginning of July, we had 104 forced overtime shifts for 4 hours or more. That does not even include the anything that's less, because we have more than that that's forced for 1 to 2 and 3 hours right in there. We had 23 forced 8-hour shifts, and we had 6 forced full-time 12-hour shifts. With all that equated out, if I did the calculation on the numbers I proposed, that would cost the county $15,050 for the first half of the year. And I can assure you that that's well encompassed into the money we've been saving since the first of the year. And I don't want to say saving, but that we're not spending in our wage budget. Kelly can maybe attest to that for me.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We'll
Thanks, Rod.
wait for further word back on that.
Thank you.
I think we vote on that yet? No,
Well.
And you don't need
yeah,
to vote on that.
voted on.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no action.
Okay, we'll move on to the jail courthouse camera integration project. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Rod, does this finish up what we started?
Yes and
Nothing's
no.
ever finished, I know.
Yeah, we did finish what we started, and we had a little money left over in that budget, in that program. Where this started is we had MCIT come in and do a review of our facility for reviewing liability in the facility. And one of the ideas they had was to look at body cameras. So we reached out to our current supplier for the sheriff's office to review what body cameras looked like. And at that time, I believe the ARPA funding, they earmarked like $75,000 for the potential body cameras. We just didn't know what that was going to look like. So we did the research on body cameras, and it's a really nice system, but it comes with a lot of bells and whistles that we really don't need. The sheriff's office, they have when the holster, when you pull your firearm, it'll trigger. When you have your car, the sirens and lights trigger. When you take off running, it's got geofencing with GPS, which doesn't work inside the jail. So it's a lot of bells and whistles that we really don't need in the jail. And that came at a price of about $235,000. And that was over 5 years, and then you renew from there. We did look at a small body camera system that would go into a Vigilon, but it was very inexpensive, and I believe you get what you pay for. So what we were looking at, we think we can better spend the money as far as putting permanent cameras in the jail in a few spots. It does a couple things for us. It widens our coverage, so we're not really needing the body camera piece. But also we're looking at putting them in some handicap cells that we have. And what that does is it takes some pressure off of our intake area, because by having them in a handicap cell, we use it as a medical observation unit. We kind of spreading things out, a little bit of the beginning of trying to find some of that separation. And so we feel we can do that piece a lot cheaper. Life Safety comes in and adds some of our cameras, adds cameras to our current system. In the meantime, I needed to have some more coverage in the courthouse upstairs and hallways for court security. So instead of adding cameras, Ryan already has a system that's getting a little outdated. Actually, I think it's quite outdated. And what we can do is just take those cameras and move them over. So his idea was to take the entire courthouse, move them all over into a Vigilon, which is the management system. And then we just have rights access to those cameras. So we're kind of taking a lot of pieces and putting it together, becoming more efficient, and yet spending a lot less money to do that. So the total cost of that whole project would come in. We'd use the remainder money of the current project and then part of the ARPA funds of the 75,000 to finish it up. And I think I have the numbers in there so that.
Yeah, looks like 33,725 is the
Correct.
total. And then you got a breakdown of where the money's coming from for that, so.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, ask a question.
Yeah,
So Rod, my concern is that we need to protect our officers, and we get some criminals in there that are not somebody that's very trustworthy. Is there any way that we could do some body cams for that situation? I mean, just get the cheaper ones and have a couple of them on hand just to protect our officers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can, at what point do you stop doing that and becomes more effective? Yes, we could put cameras on everybody and include the cameras in the jail, but we do have we added and implemented audio in certain areas to go along with our cameras. And we rarely have any blind spot areas other than inside the cell. So one option would be we take on maybe two or three of these little cameras, and I don't have that in the plan here, but they would be a lot smaller cost, and then you wear them if you had an incident going in. But I can tell you in our policies and procedures right now, when we do a cell extraction and something that's an incident happening in a cell, we have actually a handheld camera that we go in with. So we would protect everyone there. We'd have audio and visual at that time. But you're basically taking it with you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
yes,
if I could just add a comment, and maybe Rod, this will let you expand a little bit, but the cameras are just one piece of the total jail management system. And so when it comes to documenting and recording the activities of the corrections officers and the inmates, Rod, you have some technology that helps that with the tracking, right?
Correct. We implemented our Guardian system. We do all the logging and tracking that way. That has camera on it, so you can take pictures in the cell if we had an incident going on. Plus the cameras throughout the jail, and we have audio capability that's being recorded. And what we're asking in this piece is that we're going to add that audio into some of the units. We have it down in our intake right now, which is mainly the area that we mainly have disturbances is in our intake area.
so we'd be looking for a motion to move ahead with this project.
Make that motion.
I'll second.
Got a motion by Ludwig, seconded by Moore. Any other questions, discussion? If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District 2, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
District 3, Commissioner Lofgren.
Aye.
District 4, Commissioner Waldman.
Yes.
District 5, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
District 1, Chair Holland.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then 3A, the AED donation. Jeff, you have a
Yeah, I can get over.
Okay,
You want that?
Here. So it was probably like a year and a half ago, in one of those random email survey things that usually. And fortunately, I looked at it and it was a survey on AED needs in rural Minnesota and directly related to that. And obviously, we have a need, so I filled that out, not thinking it was really going to amount to anything at all. And then shortly after, we went through the ARPA funding meeting, and one of the goals was to get new AEDs for all the squads and med bags. Got an email saying that they're going to roll it out across the state, and it's the U of M and the Helmsley Charitable Trust that were paying for all of the AEDs, and the goal is to get them into all law enforcement vehicles. So we were able to jump on that, and I was already in the process of trying to figure out how to do that. And through some wrangling and pushing, we were able to get to the front of the line. So we were one of the first agencies to get that grant. We've gotten all the AEDs. Denise from my office went through the training to be the trainer. So then we were able to, in our last in-service meeting, get the training. We got the AEDs now, and she also went through and got all the serial numbers recorded and issued to the squads and the deputies. So as of today, most of them have been put in a squad car and are up and running. So awesome news that obviously the deputies are out there and they're one of the first to get on a scene, and that those first several minutes make all the difference in a heart issue, as I'm sure you've heard. So looking for good things and a good response on those. And one of the other benefits of it is that they're also going to look at or help us go through our old AEDs that we had out there. And we're not going to throw them away. We're going to be able to push those out to the community. So we'll have several, I don't have a number right now of what that looks like for our old ones that will be serviceable. And I think our first offer is going to be through the first responder groups, fire departments, and that kind of stuff, and see where their needs are, obviously as co-responders. And if there's anything left, again, community groups or organizations that have, meeting spaces that there's a likelihood that they could be used. So it's a multi-level benefit to the county in being able to get those. So obviously it worked out great. So
Nice.
thank you. And do we have any sense of how many people we've had AEDs in our squad cars for several years? And I don't know if we had them in every squad car, but I know
We did.
the first week that we put them in, I think it was even the next day, an officer used one to get basically save somebody's life.
Yeah, if I remember right, it was right over here at Jan and Gary's, and it was current Chief Deputy Grice that was the one who did that. So yes, that worked out great. We do use them fairly often, not maybe with the same success. And again, every scene's going to be different, but we definitely put them to use.
And pushing them out to places where people gather is an awesome thing, because that golden minutes is critical. So
It really is.
Mr. Chair. So like when you push them out to the public, like say at Walmart, maybe they might have theirs already,
I
but
think some of those, yeah.
so will the dispatch have that data in front of them?
Well,
Hey, there's one, like, they'd be accessible before our deputy gets there, does that kind of work like that?
so funny you should mention that. We're also in as you know, we're in our RMS system is through a group of 4 counties, 4 other counties. And so we are currently also in the process of going through a organization that's called Pulse Point. And what they're going to do is create a link that we can register every AED in our county. And so if someone calls in, it'll automatically link with dispatch where the closest AED is. That's registered. So we'll have some work to do with that. They're working, Carlton is pulling a lot of the weight on the data part of it right now and getting things set up. And then once that gets settled, then we'll have to go through, again, hoping the fire departments will help out a little bit to try to cover the county on where those are and get that public. So you can go into it, you can take a picture of it to show where it's at in the building. And then again, it's that instant access to somebody. If they're driving through even, that calls in and says, no, somebody's having a heart attack in my car, they can direct them right to where an AED is and get that information to them quickly. So, yeah. And again, the quicker you can get there, the better the outcome tends to be. So yes, we could do it in-house, but hopefully before too long, that will be turned on as well. So
Good work. Yeah.
Thank you. I believe because we pulled it off the consent agenda, we'll need a motion here to accept the grant.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Got a motion by Ludwig, second by Lovgren. Any more discussion? And thanks, Matt, for pulling that off. It's interesting. If not, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
District 2, Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
District 3, Commissioner Ludwig. Aye. District 4, Commissioner Waldman.
Yes.
District 5, Commissioner Ludwig.
Aye.
District 1, Chair Holland.
Yes.
Thank you.
And now we'll have a budget discussion led by Kelly.
I'm going to go over here because I
All
like
right.
to present from over here better. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So I am here today to kind of kick off our 2023 budget discussion. And hopefully we can give you some things to think about today as you're going through those department presentations. I'm going to go through my budgets that I am responsible for today once my presentation's over. But hopefully you'll have some things to think about as you're hearing presentations from other departments, get some ideas of questions to ask. And this will just kind of give you a lay of the land of where we are at the very beginning. So this is just an overall review of the budget process. So obviously at the very beginning, we're here today to hear just the initial budget request overview and the big picture of where we're at. You'll hear about the budgets that I'm responsible for. And then the next few Tuesdays, you're going to have the department budget meetings. And then September 6th, we can have a budget discussion if needed at the county board meeting. And then by that September 20th board meeting, we need to adopt our preliminary budget and levy. But of course, it doesn't stop there because then we move to the next column where we will have additional budget meetings as necessary to ensure our levy is where you want it to be, make sure our budget fits that levy. And then it will all culminate on December 8th at the Truth and Taxation meeting. And then you will hopefully adopt a final levy and budget on December 20th. So that's going to be our next 4 months or so of budget activities. I always want to hit on the difference between a budget and a levy because sometimes people use the terms interchangeably, but they're not. The budget is the total revenue, the total expenses of the county. So in 2022, the total revenue and expenses obviously were both about $50.5 million, where our levy was not nearly that amount. Most of our expenses are covered by other revenues such as fees, charges, grants, donation, interest, that type of thing. So taxes is actually one of that's less than half of our how we pay for our expenses. On the right-hand side on that table, you can see the 2022 information and just broken down on the budget, the expenses of the budget and how those things, what they cost us in 2022 or what we estimated they were going to cost us. And then on the right-hand side, it tells you how much of those expenses is covered by tax dollars, by our levy. So you can kind of run down the line and see, the differences of what's covered by levy and then what's covered by other revenues, because that's the difference.
How many years do we have left in the two big bonds?
Well, there's a slide on that later, but 2031.
We're clicking down.
Yeah, it seems far away, but then when you're already talking about 2023, it's not that far away at all. I just wanted to cover the budget format a little bit. On the left-hand side is kind of a budget report or account descriptions that come out of our financial system and what the accounts look like. But that very first number on the left-hand side is your fund number. And so I have a list of our major funds that we budget in on the right-hand side. And so as you can see, like general fund is 01. And so the numbers, the account numbers on the left-hand side are corresponding to general fund account numbers. The next 3 digits are your department numbers. And so 005, for example, is commissioner budget. And you'll start to see as you're looking at as the departments present their budgets, you'll start to see those next 3 numbers change depending on which department you're talking with. And the next few numbers, those are for programs and services. You do see those used some throughout, like HHS. We use them in some solid waste things to just differentiate different programs or services. And then lastly, of course, the last 4 numbers brings you to what that line item is for within the budget. So each budget is made up of several different pieces or line items. And those are all broken down separately by category. And so as you're looking at, just as departments are presenting their budgets, I think it's important to look at those line items and see what they are, see what's included in those line items. Because sometimes they get to be pretty big numbers and there's a lot of things in there. So it's good to understand what's involved in those things. A budget is honestly just a bunch of assumptions. It's guesses of what we think our revenue and expenses are going to be. And some of those assumptions, we have really good indications of past costs, past revenues. And so as departments will be presenting, a lot of times they'll show previous years what they actually ended up as. We also get estimates of revenues, for example, county program aid from the state. They've already told us what we should expect next year. But again, those are promises, but sometimes those promises unfortunately are broken too. And sometimes those contracts, for example, they don't work out as we thought, or just different things. And so our budgets are based on assumptions, the best assumptions we can make, but they are just that, assumptions. So usually in December of each year, I will come back so in December of 2022, I'll be coming back with the 2022 budget and with some adjustments saying, well, now that we've made it through the year, we understand what those revenues and expenses actually will be. On the expenses line, big question marks, they're not necessarily big question marks, but they're big portions are wages and then health insurance. And this year, health insurance is a little bit tricky. We all remember back to the years when we were with the co-op and we never knew our health insurance number till we were really far into the budget process. And then sometimes our whole budget was thrown off because we didn't know that our insurance was going up a double-digit large number. And now we've moved to the self-insurance and we felt like we're more in the driver's seat with where our rates are going to be. We have more knowledge of where our rates are going to be. However, like this year, everything's changing really still up to this point of where our health insurance rates need to be next year. So throughout the budget, some departments have different health insurance increases already put in. They're all somewhere between about 8 and 10%. And so I feel comfortable with that, but yet if we end up closer to that 10% increase, we're going to have to see some of those departments bump up slightly than the numbers we're working with today. And maybe we'll end up at more than 10%. Claims have still trended very, very high. So moving on to the 2023 budget and looking at the budget as a whole for revenue. In 2022, our revenue was sitting at 50 million, almost 400,000. For 2023, that's estimated to go up to almost $54 million. So an increase about 3.5 million. As you can see from the graph where those revenue increases come from, you can see like the general fund is slightly up with revenue estimates. HHS is pretty much level and road and bridge jumps up significantly. And so you'll see that throughout this conversation and is that road and bridge has big jumps in both revenue and expenses. And those are all completely tied to project revenues and project expenses. So when you see that, yes, our revenues are estimated to go up $3.5 million already in a preliminary budget that has really no property tax increases in it yet, that's really tied to those road and bridge projects and the state aid that comes with those. Top general fund revenues. So obviously HHS, highway, they have their specific revenues. The general fund has a lot of little pieces of revenue. So I have just the top 10 revenues here listed, showing what they were in 2022 and what they're estimated to be in 2023. That very top one is honestly disappointing to me. The county program aid, Pine County, is estimated to go down when the state of Minnesota has a budget surplus. So that's very disappointing that we're losing almost $100,000 in revenue off the top of the general fund in county program aid. Police contracts bumping up a little bit between the years. The PILT is bumping up a little bit. So I think that there's a couple of things that play there with it going up. Some of our PILT dollars are based on the value of the land, and we only get to report new values every 6 years. And so this is the first year that it's on the new values. So it is getting bumped up a little bit. Police aid, so that's staying very stable. Forfeited property sales is, I'm estimating to go down. As Greg has constantly told us, we have almost sold everything that we could sell, unless we want to start talking about selling Memorial Forest and things like that. So I am looking at property sales starting to go down from that $300,000 level. The solid waste assessment, currently we had left it unchanged at the $10 per improved parcel. So estimating that to stay the same. Penalties and interest that people pay on their property taxes, that seems like it's going up a little bit when you look at historical. Probation aid, that's one we talk about a lot. And this year, again, we were down at 26% reimbursement when the statute says 50%. And so just putting that at more realistic numbers. Assessor contracts. So as we've talked about quite a bit with the assessing system in Pine County, cities and townships have a choice of who they want to contract with, the county or a private assessor. With the change in the assessor licensing, it has left a lot of townships and cities with no one to contract with except for the county. So we have, as you've seen over the last couple of months with my request to add staff in the assessor's office, you're also seeing that corresponding revenue jump up. And we'll talk about that too when we get to the assessor budget. And then recorder fees, those dollars that come to the county with every document recorded. Things are really slowing down in the real estate world, but we're still seeing recordings come through, just maybe not as much of a pace so that they were. So we're thinking that'll stay pretty stable as to where it currently is. Moving on to expenses. So again, and I didn't change my titles there. Sorry about that. It says 2022 revenue, but it should say 2022 expenses were 50,600,000. 2023 expenses were proposed at 55.5 million. So that's an increase of about almost $5 million. So as you look at the chart of where those dollars are coming from and where those expenses are, again, you see a jump up in the general fund, which we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Really, that's tied to less revenue. So, and then it's tied to really wages and salaries and benefits and that type of thing. HHS, very stable for expenses. And then road and bridge, again, you see a big jump up there. And that's again tied to projects. Top non-debt expenses. So overall county-wide, when you look at where does our money go, the number one place our money goes is into those salaries and benefits. And between 2022 and 2023, that's estimated to go up about $1.3 million. So right off the top, you have our biggest expense is going up a significant amount. Road and bridge construction, again, going up almost $3 million, but we don't get terribly excited about that because that's all project-based and has aids that go along with it. Out-of-home placement costs. So Becky and Terry and their team has done a really good job at trying to manage those expenses, and we've seen them come down year after year. However, now we're seeing them tick back up slightly. One thing that you will see as we talk about, as you get into those department budgets, the juvenile center expenses, those were previously always paid out of human services. And so in 2023, the proposal is to move those expenses over to the general fund because those are tied to the probation kids. And so move them out of the human services fund into the general fund. So those expenses in general are going up $69,000, but there's also $110,000 that are coming out of HHS and going to the general fund. Major equipment purchases. So we have that is our next biggest expense, and you see it going down $100,000 between 2022 and 2023. In 2022, we made a clear move that we wanted to do some catching up on vehicle purchases, and so we put an extra $100,000 into vehicle purchases in 2022, and now Mark is requesting or feels okay about going back to where we used to be on that replacement schedule. Medical services to prisoners. So Rod will touch on that of why that's going up so much and the differences of what we're seeing. And then the library appropriation is another top expense, but it's barely going up. As Terry reported at the last meeting, we have the smallest proposed increase at like 0.88%. Debt, here's your slide, Matt. Of our 3 debt bonds that we have as listed. The payoff years are on that far right-hand side. Annual payments are kind of in the middle there, just to the right of interest rates. So each year we spend, or in 2023, we're going to be spending almost $2.4 million on debt payments. But again, as we get closer and closer to those payoff years, that's going to be a nice budget relief if we don't have to do something else. Oh, that's what I said. Hopefully. So the entire budget, just pulling those revenues and those expenditures together. So for 2023, right now, as the budget sits today, we have about $53.9 million of revenues estimated, but about $55.5 million of expenses. So with that, we've got a gap currently of almost $1.7 million that's not filled. You can see those areas that are out of balance. So the general fund specifically, looking at those 3 major funds that we have, the general fund, you can see that the expenses are exceeding the revenues. And so that's a place we're going to need to work on. HHS is slightly off balance, and Becky will touch on that and what she's requesting to try to make that balance. And then Mark is at a balanced budget with no levy increase. County department overview. So I like to break it down by department, and remember how we talked about our number 1 expense is our salaries and benefits. So as you look at the chart on the right-hand side, I broke it down by departments and how much new levy dollars that department would need to make their budget balance today. So that's your first column. Your next column is how much did the salaries and benefits in that department go up? So for example, the sheriff, currently the budget would need almost $600,000 more of levy put into the general fund for it to balance. However, $480,000 of that is salaries and benefits. You'll hear from the sheriff, there are 2 additional positions within that number. But it's also, it's a big number of that portion of increase that he needs. The jail, a few of them that I wanted to touch on, the jail, for example, it looks, he needs $300,000 more of levy dollars, but he's only got about $200,000 of salaries. So that would first make you think, oh, so Rod's got some big expenses he wants to do this year. but that's really not the case at all. The case is that it's a loss of revenue. So he no longer has that boarding revenue to help offset those costs. Also running down kind of the list, you see, for example, assessor. This ties back to those contracts. We need $116,000 of new levy dollars to help balance that budget. However, the salaries actually went up more than that. And that's the exact opposite of Rod's problem, is we have more revenues to help offset those costs. Otherwise, I think kind of running down, it's all a little bit unremarkable, really. And I always just think it's a little interesting. So, I mean, you get down to building maintenance, for example, and they only need $357 more of levy dollars to balance the budget. However, their salaries are going up $14,500. And that's just a testament to being able to cut places that we can cut. Questions on that? That's a lot of data. All right, jumping into 2023 tax levy, because we've kind of danced around it already. Our 2022 tax levy was $20,652,675. So I know we always like to talk in percentages. So Steve's going to ask, well, how much is a 1% levy increase? Well, that's $206,000. And so if we wanted to be done with the budget today and said, great, we're happy with everything we're going to be done. These are the numbers we would end up at. The general fund needs $1.4 million of levy dollars to balance. HHS needs $264,000. Our debt needs an additional $13,000. So we are down at our big square of almost $1.7 million levy increase we'd need to balance the budget today, which equals 8.1%. Right. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm not advocating to do that, but that's worst case scenario. Should you all want to walk away today and just be done?
Because there's two ways to solve the equation. You do a no percent increase and you tell department heads you got to cut $1.7 million out of your budget. Or we somewhere meet in the middle and say, here's a reasonable expectation of a levy increase that we could swallow, and department heads, you got to do the rest. Correct?
Correct, with guidance from you guys.
Yeah.
Of what things you like and what things you do not like. Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Not to get too far off the subject, but we never, I think last year was the first year we kind of got before the game, previous budgets, it was always, we got this number at the end of all the presentations, which was really hard to figure out. So this is extremely nice. It looks a little weird or it looks a little scary on the front side, but at least we kind of got an idea. We used to kind of add up as we went and think in your head, well, what's this all adding up to be? And then you try to, so this is awesome. And
thank you.
And I appreciate it too, Kelly, because I mean, we've definitely, when we added all the single numbers, had a much worse case scenario to look at before in other years. So I know if you're a department head sitting there and you're listening to a board say, there's no way in heck we can swallow that much of an increase. It's scary because we're all pretty, I know you department heads well enough to know that they've been pretty conservative in their numbers, and there's some things that are completely out of their control. So Matt, did you have some?
So you added in your insurance increases and stuff in these numbers, right?
Correct. And Steve, you had said there was a couple ways to solve the budget. There was part of the 0% idea also sometimes is to spend reserves. And so that's what this next slide discusses, is back in the 2010 era, there was a lot of 0%. Yet the expenses didn't match a 0%, so then reserves were spent. And you can do that, that's fine. However, as you can see in 2011, we were in a really bad spot. Our weekly payroll is about $650,000. And if you only have $800,000 in the bank, that's very scary. And so there's been a lot of work since 2011 to get us to a spot where we're not quite at what the state auditor recommends our reserves to be at. The state auditor would recommend our reserves to be at 35 to 50% of our operating expenses. However, when we started 10 years ago back at 6% of our reserves, we've worked really hard. This board has and previous boards has to get us up to approximately 26% of our operating expenses. So I just want to address that to start with, because yes, you can spend reserves, but that doesn't, and it usually doesn't end you up in a good place, as you can see here. And so
If it was only for 1 year and you had to spend 2% of your reserves or something, that's fine.
right,
These always have tails on them.
right.
So you start going down a pretty dangerous path. If you're relying on those, I think reserves are for when something happens during the year that you had no control over, and suddenly you got to spend $300,000-400,000 on something that you hadn't budgeted for. You need to have that reserve.
All right. I did want to just touch on too as well, restricted funds. So as we talk on this slide, we're talking about unrestricted fund balance. And so those are funds that don't have any requirements. It's in our bank account. We can spend it as needed. However, within our bank account, we do have restricted funds. So funds that we have to track separately that can only be used for certain purposes. And sometimes those purposes are statute driven, sometimes they're grant driven, or the county board can make some of those decisions too, if you want to set them aside for a specific purpose. For example, in the middle of the screen there, you see the jail canteen. And so that was an action of the board a couple of years ago, was to set those funds aside, not to roll those dollars just into the unrestricted fund balance, to put them aside so that when Rod comes up with an expense, he needs to replace all the mattresses, he's got funds to do it, and it doesn't have to be done within the budget process. I think I listed the ones that have larger balances here. And I'm just going to quickly run through them. AIS, so aquatic invasive species. So that's an aid that we get annually from the state. In the winter, usually you guys hear a plan of how we're going to spend those monies in each given year. Previously, we had never spent more than what we had gotten. In 2021 was the first year that we had done that. So the first year we dipped into these restricted funds. Otherwise, year after year, we were just building them. And that's okay to dip into them. That's what they're there for. And I think some really neat projects got done this year with those funds. Attorney forfeitures, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. Reese uses that to offset some training costs, some mileage, that type of thing. E911, so that's a fund that Denise works a lot on and is making sure we've got the technology we need. Gun permits, we've had a lot of discussions on gun permits throughout the years because those funds can only be used to support the gun permit process. So they're not just a free for all. We can spend them however we want. They have to support that process. Jail canteen, I already mentioned about that. So that's the funds, that's really the inmates' dollars. And so that is set aside so that Rod can purchase things for the inmates with that fund. The land fund at $708,000. I have a little star there because that is made up of a lot of little portions. So the board has over the years decided to set aside funds from those land sales for blight cleanup. So when we get those tax forfeited properties that are a mess, it gives us some funds to clean those properties up. Our forest roads is another little portion of that. Again, the board has decided over the years that over the last 2 years, that we want to set aside some funds from those proceeds for parks and recreation. We've talked a lot about our Overstar Trail projects, and we've had some success getting some grant dollars and things for that. However, those grants always need matches, and we've never had an ability to have a match before. And then timber development, and that's really just making those memorial forests something that's usable. McV, so that's a home visiting program, our next restricted fund through HHS. And so that's something that Becky has slowly been spending down. Recorder compliance and recorder technology fund. So those are with every single document that's recorded, there's $10 that goes into the compliance fund and $11 that goes into the technology fund. Those two funds have some significant restrictions on what we can spend the money on. That recorder compliance, you might look at that and go, holy cow, that's a lot of money in there. However, that is going to pay for our new tax and CAMA system to the tune of about $350,000. So over the next year, you're going to see that dwindle way down. But that was an intentional savings over the last many years to get it to that point, to make sure we had funds to make that purchase with.
When are you starting with the new tax system?
So the question was when we're starting with the new tax system. So in May, like a couple months ago, May, we had our kickoff meeting. Ryan and his team did a download of data from our current system. And so Tyler, the new company, has been working on converting that data. In October, we will be getting our first look at our data in their system. And really the project can go pretty fast after that. We're the 9th county, just like us, that this team has converted. So they're feeling very confident that actually it's going to go smoothly and pretty fast. And so right now the target is to be live on that system in March.
Oh. Nice.
Yeah. And recorder technology fund. So that is a fund that can only be used for technology in the recorder's office. But Ryan and I have worked together over the years to come up with allowable uses that help the whole county. So the recorder's office, for example, it really can't be down without power for the day. So something we do every, I think it's 3 years, is replace the courthouse backup batteries with it. And that's something that just takes strain off of our tax levy, and we're able to use these funds. And so that's kind of my message with these funds. And also as we're looking at this budget deficit and what could we do, keep some of these funds in mind, because are there things that we can shift to one of these restricted funds away from the general fund? But remember, these restricted funds can only be used certain ways. But top 10 taxpayers. So this is more kind of just an FYI, an interesting piece. So when we look at the top 10 taxpayers in the county, here they are. The dollars represented are only the county portion of the dollars that they pay. And so they still have their school portion, they still have their township or city portion, and they still usually have a state portion that they pay as well. So when you look at those top 10, they are alone paying 6.5% of the county's levy. I do have a little star by number 10 there because that might seem really low for a big company in Pine County, a big power company in Pine County. However, they pay a significant portion of what's called county-wide taxes. And so that is not county levy dollars. That's just, you'll see it in one of my budgets. It's power line taxes. And so it's just an additional tax that they pay above and beyond actual levy dollars. So that number 10, they pay out another $123,500 in taxes. So that would put them really up to number 4 if you really added in everything they pay to the county. But again, that extra that they pay is not levy dollars. All right, we're getting to the end. Considerations. So I think I've kind of already mentioned this, but as we're listening to the department presentations, you look at those departments and ask the questions about the line items and see where, are there things that we could change, things we could shift. And with that shifting comes an ARPA discussion. Obviously, we have a nice pot of money in ARPA. In March, we had, at the county board meeting, we had a discussion and kind of allocated out funds of where we thought that they could be spent. And really, when we got through that exercise, we'd spent all of our ARPA funds and then some. However, for example, you heard Rod today, we had $75,000 earmarked for body cameras, and he's only using $23,000 of it. I think we had 100,000 marked for AEDs, and now we're not using any of it. So as we get to, I think one of the budget presentations, we're going to bring that spreadsheet back and show you where we are now, because we have opened up some dollars that maybe we can start to consider moving some expenses over to those. Added staff, so there are a few added staff within the budget, and so that's obviously always a consideration of, are those added staff needed? And then, as I just touched on, we have some nice restricted fund balances. Are there expenses we can move to those rather than paying with tax levy dollars? All right, that's the end of that part of my presentation. Questions on that?
Just thank you very much.
Yes, that's great.
I think it's a great layout of where we gotta go.
Yes.
I don't think we need to make any, I think we just need to mull this over and we have it in our minds to come to our first real cow meeting with budget stuff and
Well, and now you're going to hear my budgets.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair,
yes,
if I could have maybe 2 minutes just to maybe review some of the points that Kelly made, because there's so much information and we could dedicate as much time over the next several months as the board is interested. But I just want to maybe highlight that the state of Minnesota has a $9+ billion deficit, and some of the state shared revenues that we rely on, county program aid and probation aid, are both being reduced. So when you're thinking about your budget, you got to scratch your head on that one, right? $9 billion surplus at the state, cuts to us or reductions to us. You know that property values have gone up significantly. The tax capacity rate is likely going to go down almost no matter what you decide on as a levy. And so that will be just an interesting piece of the arithmetic when Kelly starts to run those numbers. But we always come back to, or sometimes come back to, that tax capacity rate as a number to compare to other counties. And I know Wadena County is, I don't know the details, but they are advocating for some unspecified change because they think their tax capacity rate is high. And I would just say you guys have been really good at focusing and understanding what that tax capacity rate is and trying to keep it relatively low compared to your neighbors. Everything that you saw today as far as budget requests, I think is reasonable, but nobody believes that it represents your priorities. And so there's some new positions, there's some funding of some programs. They're reasonable to me, but they may not be your priority. So as you think about that in the discussions, be sure to bring out your priorities. Whether you can express them in minute detail is not necessary, but at the macro level, because then we in the department heads can do some work to come back and say, well, here's some alternatives if you really didn't like that or can't support it. And the earlier you do that, the easier it is, because we have more time to adjust. I remember at least one year where the county board set a target levy in advance. I think we've gotten away from that. I think that's probably a good thing, because it really, it makes the conversation harder when you have a levy number out of the gate, I think. But my hope would be that as we have these department level presentations, that we're hearing you advocate for your priorities, right? If you remember that slide that Kelly showed, the lowest levy of any year was a 0% increase, and the biggest increase was a 6.5% increase. My presumption is that at the end of the day in December, when you're voting on a levy, it's going to be somewhere greater than 0, but less than 6.5%. But I don't really know that for a fact, and I don't know where you're going to land. So in the conversations, I think it's helpful for us to hear you advocating for what you think the end game really is. In other words, if you support all the requests, but at the end of the day, you don't support the levy, we've not really used those budget meetings effectively. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then I'll just conclude by echoing Kelly's point about ARPA. We probably have a little bit of ARPA money that we can reallocate without much work. If we want to reallocate substantial amounts of ARPA money, it's probably a lot of work. And so again, the earlier you share your thoughts on that piece, and I think ARPA is going to be on the discussion for next Tuesday's meeting. I think. So, you know, if you want to talk about that, that should come up pretty quick. So thank you very much.
I can't, my editorial for today is just this. One of my great, I don't know if you call him a hero, but Bud Grant always struck me as somebody who thought through the process very well. And I was a big follower of his. And when it came time to cut down to the regular staff, I always thought, man, that's got to be hard. And Bud Grant always would have that little TV show and say, it's not a big deal. You know, some people are just better than others and we need those positions. And so I kind of carry that to the budget process it's hard for me. It's hard for me to get inside of somebody's department and say, man, I don't know what they're what are they thinking here? So I think if we have questions, we have to ask questions of Kelly and David, and maybe call in a department head and say, what are you really thinking here? Why does this number have to be what it is? Because if we don't ask those questions, we're just guessing at what they're really asking for. And if we have an opinion, I don't have to tell this board. I know people are pretty good about saying their opinion. So we'll get there. We'll get to a consensus. In a few weeks, we'll have a real good idea of where we're at. You know, I think we've come such a long way in our budgeting process, and I've always told people it's an ongoing 12-month a year process. We've got a real good idea of where we're at right now with our budget and our spending and what our expected revenue will be for till the end of the year. So it's not a huge surprise that we're not going to be hit with the surprise that we're $1 million overspent. I guess where I'm going. So it's always hard to make a new budget if you don't have an idea where you're at with the old budget. I think we've solved that issue. So
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right. So we have my individual department budgets to do next.
Okay,
So it might take, I would say, an hour. You want to take like 5?
we'll take a 5.
Kelly?
I appreciate the air conditioning in here, but they could probably turn it up or down. Whatever you say, it's kind of chilly in here.
I didn't see it.
I have it printed too. Okay.
And me too.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in, that's 3, 4, that's roughly 100.
Anybody want a lifesaver?
Easy.
Huh?
Want a lifesaver?
Sure.
Steve went and got his thing. Flannel jacket.
Did he really? I have for sweaters.
I think it's.
You done yet?
in here.
I'm not done
Want
yet.
a lifesaver, Kelly?
I'm good.
I'm good. I didn't know you actually had lifesavers.
Ryan? Want one?
I'm good, thank you.
Deb, you want
He has
one?
food?
Okay.
Thank you.
So, she just said that insurance were on the wall.
Okay, are we all back?
I think we're all back. So I am gonna go through just the individual departments that I'm responsible for their budgets. And so hopefully we can get this done. But again, ask me questions about, look at those line items, let's dig in. So my first budget that I want to go through was just the auditor treasurer office. And it's pretty easy. I mean, you get down to the bottom line and I need $14,000 more of levy dollars to operate in 2023 as I do in 2022, which equals 2% of the overall budget. However, I just kind of want to point out a few things. So you see a decrease in the full-time line item and an increase in the part-time line item. So that was an action that we did in July. When I was backfilling a position, we switched it from full-time to part-time. So that you're seeing that change reflected here. Obviously, health insurance everywhere, you're going to see that number jump up. As I said, that our health insurance, we were estimating in the budget somewhere between 8 and 10%. However, then you look at my line item and go, well, Kelly, that says 13%. And that's simply just because there's a change from last year's budget to what the staff have for insurance coverage today. So in 2022, we might have budgeted someone as a single coverage and now they have family coverage. And so that's why you're seeing 13% there instead of that 8 to 10%. Other things to point out that I just wanted to touch on, advertising, legals and subscriptions. So that number is so large because that's my delinquent tax list that I have to publish, and that's a significant expense every year. And just looking at kind of historically what it has costed, trying to come up with a realistic estimate. Independent auditing, so that's what we pay the state auditors. Again, year after year, we seem to be under budgeting that line item. So I wanted to make some progress to actually budgeting it towards closer to where we've actually been. I think it's been helpful the last 2 years because our audits have been done remotely. And so when the auditors were coming here, we had to pay for their drive time, we had to pay for their mileage. And that's 2 or 3 staff, many days driving up here. So it was a lot. And so we've had those expenses that we've been able to cut. But with CARES Act last year, with ARPA this year and ARPA years to come, our federal audits are getting more intensive to ensure we're using those funds correctly. So that kind of balances out any savings we have from them doing it remotely. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is the bottom line item printing expense. You see it going up $2,000, which equals a big 31%. And so what that involves, that is our property tax statement printing. And for many years, we had a company who had done our printing and they did a really great job. However, then 2 years ago, they were bought out by a different company and it went very bad. And you can't have your tax statements you can't have them incorrectly printed. You can't have them not go out when they need to go out because they have to go out by statute by a certain day. So we left that company and went to a new company this past year, which the price was a little bit higher than the old one, but not terrible. And that even went worse. We didn't have as bad of a time as Kanabec County that had a different county's phone number printed on their tax statements.
What's it ours?
No, it was a southern county. So needless to say, this year it went even worse. And actually that company said, we're not printing tax statements anymore. Like, we're out of this. So we have spent the summer trying to find a new printing vendor. And honestly, there's not a lot of printing vendors out there that can work with this huge file and get the print layout all correct, and mail out about 20,000 pieces of mail, stuff the envelopes, get it all correct. There's not a lot of printers available to do that. So we were kind of down to a choice of two printers, one out of the Twin Cities and then another one out of Michigan. The one out of Michigan has never worked with Minnesota before,
Stay away.
but they're cheap, but they've never worked with Minnesota before. And then the other print vendor obviously has worked in Minnesota. They've printed for other counties with our same system, but they are more expensive to do the printing. But what we've heard from the counties like Stearns County that's used them, they have really good reviews. And so kind of those were our two choices. And so we felt like we needed to go with the one. Yes, it's more expensive, which I don't like, but they know Minnesota. They've got experience doing it. And I'm hopeful that it will go much smoother than we've had the last 2 years. So that is what that jump up is. So again, in the end, for the auditor treasurer, we need about $14,000 more of tax levy dollars, which is 2% of the total budget. I missed both of those.
I always say you should text C-Train doing it.
Right?
Do a good job. Sorry. Total parcel.
Oh, total parcels. So we have about 30,600 total parcels in the county. 28,000 are taxable. And then we mail out about 19,500 pieces of mail because some of those are a property owner owns multiple parcels. So it ends up to be about 19,500 envelopes that get mailed.
Does the printing company do that or do we have?
Oh, the printing company does it.
For that number,
Last year.
$2,000?
No, the total cost to print them is the 8,500.
That's the
That's the
increase, right?
increase, yeah.
Right. Yeah, the 2,000 is just the increase in the new vendor.
Or so 8, yeah, so it's 8.5. That's still a good deal.
That's still cheap.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
would you stuff 19,000 envelopes?
Well, they have equipment that does it, but
We used to do that.
yeah, they used to do it.
Remember when we used to print them all and rip them and then stuff them and, yeah,
We printed them in-house.
Mhm.
good. Yeah, we still have the printer, I think.
No, we don't.
We don't? Oh, that was my favorite printer.
How much time did it take you?
Oh, is it somewhere?
Took days.
Oh, okay, it's not currently hooked up, but we do still have it, Terry. Good news.
Yeah,
How many people?
it was, the assessor's office did it and the treasurer's office did it, I think is
Yeah.
together on
It's
it.
not something you really can do in-house.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. So
But we used to always calculate them manually too with our adding machines. I mean, it's like, times
it's like fun. It really does.
I'm old. No.
Okay, anyway, so that's the treasure budget. We'll move on to the next one in line, which is truth and taxation. So in November, those proposed tax statements get mailed out. And this one directly has the same situation going on as I talked about. The truth and taxation is all printing and mailing expenses. And so again, we have to move to a new printer. So you're seeing some increased expenses overall for that. Overall, it's $1,900 more last year this year than last year for 2023. Sorry, I guess I didn't get the difference column printed on there. So it's $1,900 increase for that, but it's all related to printing costs and paper costs, because the cost of paper has really gone up. So if we're good with that one, we'll move on to the next one, aquatic invasive species. We're doing some easy ones first. Aquatic invasive species, as I already talked about with that restricted fund balance. So this is all state aid dollars. And so when we do the budget, we budget it so that our revenue and our expenses equal. The known things that we have are our salaries within this department. So 25% of Caleb's salary is paid out of this department. And then we do have our watercraft inspectors as well in that temporary line. But otherwise, kind of what rounds out this budget is the program expense. And so again, every winter, you guys, Caleb comes with a presentation of we've worked with the lake associations and the interested parties, and this is what we want to do with those program expense dollars. Which is a lot of times some education, some treatment, some chemical treatment, that type of stuff. So, and as I mentioned already, when you look at that fund balance, it was going up and up and up. And then 2021 is the first year we actually spent more than what we got, which is okay.
Is participation staying strong there with the Lake Association?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because that partner with this dollars is a very important piece to have those lake associations on board. All right, moving on to the recorder. So recorder, as I talked about, there's not a lot of changes here. Our revenues are staying very stable. You see some minuses in the recorder tech fund fees and the compliance fees. And really that comes down to, I think recordings are, they're not going to go away, but they're going to slow down. And the good news is that those two fees, those go into this restricted fund that we just use to help offset other costs. So it doesn't have bottom line impact with that estimate of those fees going down. Because the very bottom two expense lines are the corresponding and they are the exact same amount. So overall, it's okay that those are going down because it doesn't have an impact. But otherwise, mainly within the recorder office, you've got our salaries and benefits staying pretty stable. There you can see on the county contribution for health insurance, that 8%. So if that works, great, but I'm starting to wonder if it's going to only be 8% with how things are going. But overall, no changes in staffing levels or anything. As we get further down into the budget, you see an increase in credit card processing fees. So within the recorder's office, we do accept credit cards when people come in for recording fees or birth certificates or marriage licenses. People can also use credit cards online to pull copies of deeds and mortgages. And so there are costs that go along with that. However, as you see up in our revenues, we do charge people to use those. And actually we charge them more than what it costs us. So those costs are going up, but it has a corresponding revenue to help offset. And then just conferences, just estimating that to go down because there's one conference a year and sometimes we get to it. So we really didn't need those funds in that line item. And like I mentioned, the recorder, the last two lines, technology and compliance, those just directly correspond with those revenue lines. So overall, you see this decrease in revenue when you get to those overall lines, decrease of revenue, but that's completely tied to those compliance and technology funds. Our expenses are going slightly down. And then overall, we are needing a slightly amount more revenue dollars to help offset. Questions on that? So there's really no changes. We've got our regular staff, no increases, nothing like that. All of our staff have been here a long time, so they don't even have any step increases left. So that's why you see barely an increase in that permanent line item, because really they just get our cost of living increases at this point. All right, we'll move on. In the recorder's office, your next page digs into those recorder restricted funds. And so as I talked about already, we have planned uses for those funds. And so I just wanted to lay out to you guys where we think we're going to be at the end of 2023 with those funds, with what we've planned to use them for. So the recorder compliance fund sitting at almost $400,000 today. By the end of next year, I'm thinking it's going to be at about $28,000. So you're going to see that dip way down because of that big expense of the tax and gamma system. On the right-hand side, the recorder equipment, you can see where we ended 2021 and what we've paid for this year so far and what we're planning to pay for next year. And so that balance between this year and next year is planned to stay pretty stable unless Ryan comes up with some projects, which he tends to, and that's okay.
What is MOM?
Yeah.
The Minnesota Online Marriage. So it's a website that all of the marriages statewide are logged to, so that it's just a public database. So I just wanted to lay that out to you guys. So, I mean, we do have a plan for those funds of what we're doing with them, and you see the big balances. All right, we'll move on to assessor. So assessor, as I've already mentioned, you actually see a bump up in our fees for services, our revenues, and that is because of all the new contracts with townships and cities that we have received. This line item does continue the direction of all of those current contracts that we have will be going down by $1 again this year, with the goal of eventually reaching 0. And so the new contracts are coming in right about where the old ones were, and then they'll all continue to decrease together. With those new revenues, those new contracts, as we've already talked about quite a bit in the last several months, and today is we did have to hire 2 additional new appraisers to cover those townships, and that does come at a cost, obviously. So you see that permanent line item bump up, 16.7%. I have a note at the bottom, though, when you look at the cost of those new appraiser positions and then the new revenue that we have coming in because of those new contracts, the net cost for 2 new positions is at $76,000. So within that bump up, that's really all that you're being tasked with, is that $76,000 of those new positions. And if we didn't have those new positions, then our revenue would have to be significantly less, about $40,000 less.
So how many townships are still not using the county?
So 4 for sure.
That are still not?
Right.
Okay.
And then,
I should say cities and townships, sorry.
yeah, 4 for sure. And then there's 1 or 2 that are a little bit question marks.
So do they have somebody else that they can use at this point in time?
So there are 2 staff members from Chisago County that have come up and contracted with those 4.
Okay.
Bring the Chisago County mindset with them.
Both of them are very good, but it's hard because every county does things differently. We look at things differently than Chisago County. So I would find it hard, and not intentionally hard, to 40 hours a week look at something one way and then 5 hours a week look at it a different way. So I think that'd be hard, but they're both really good to work with.
And one other thing, they're paying more.
Correct.
Paying more, and then the work that they do generally is on a weekend.
Yeah, it is, all their work is on the weekends because they work full time for another county. Otherwise, as we kind of march down the line items within the assessor's office, you see some increases, but again, most of them are in wages and salaries and benefits. Otherwise, I mean, you get down to reference books and supplies, and I'm asking for a $50 increase, but because it's such a small number, it says 33%. So don't get too excited. It's $50. And then printing expense, again, that gets to, this is the printing of the valuation notices. We have the new printer who is more expensive. And so you're seeing that jump up there as well. And then lastly, the appraiser clothing allowance. In the last contract, each appraiser was given $300 a year to purchase boots and things that they need for working in the field, similar to what like the zoning guys get. Because I mean, they're out in the field, they're walking through brush and ripping clothes and things like that. And so you do see an increase in that appraiser allowance because we have those 2 new appraisers. So we needed to bump that up to $600 since each is allocated $300 a year. So overall, the assessor budget, I mean, I look at it and I think it looks tough at a 21% increase. However, I think it's a long time coming and a long time of discussion, and really where I think the board has directed us to go with getting those contracts, which then equated to additional staff. Questions on that? All right, we'll move on to zoning then. As we look at zoning, our revenues are pretty stable. Our septic special assessment, so that is not the ones that you guys see all the time. These are low-income ones that are done through Lakes and Pines. And we don't do very many of them because the funds we get from the state to do them are very small. However, we've done one more, so that revenue line item will come back in. And as that money comes back in, then we're able to put it back out. So you're seeing that jump up a bit. Our zoning permits, honestly, I thought that those permits were gonna slow down a long time ago with costs to build and things, and it hasn't. But I think we're getting to the point where it has to. Yes, the costs of materials are coming down slightly, but interest rates are going up. And so I think that the building permits are probably gonna slow down a little bit. So we have a $5,000 decrease in that line item. A new thing that we have is the Lower St. Croix State Grant. For this year, we got funds for that. And so our office is doing some water sampling and things for the Lower St. Croix that we got reimbursement for some of our staff time. So in 2022, you see that as a revenue. In 2023, you don't see that as a revenue. However, we think that there might be some funds, maybe not necessarily from the Lower St. Croix, but one of the watersheds where we'll be doing some work and getting some reimbursement for salaries. And you see that come in under the refunds and reimbursements line. There's a $5,000 revenue in there, thinking we're going to do something and get reimbursed for some time. It might not be to the extent of that Lower St. Croix like we've done in 2022, but we're going to do something. So it is a new revenue line item there. Otherwise, I think marching down kind of the expense side, we're not proposing any new staff. The increase you see is just because of steps and the cost of living increase. County contribution, again, you say, Kelly, you said you were going to do an 8 to 10% increase, but this says almost a 35% increase in that line item. And that is because of a change in plan from a staff member going from single coverage to family coverage that wasn't budgeted in 2022. Otherwise, you've got your typical increases in benefits. And as we kind of march down the line, everything else is pretty stable. You see some big percentages, but when you look at it, it's $500 cut here and $500 added there, or $200 cut there. So they're very small numbers when dollar amounts. Percentages, yes, they're big percentages, but overall the dollar amounts are small. So bottom line, we are expecting slightly more revenue, about 4% more revenue. But yet we've got about 9.4% more expenses in 2023 than 2022. And really all those expenses lie in the wages and salaries. And we're not asking for additional staff or anything. So overall, when I look at that bottom line item at 19.5%, it looks scary, but when you actually do the math, it's $19,000. It ends up at a big percentage just because it's a small budget. Questions on that? All right. Solid waste. So the solid waste budget has gotten a little more complicated throughout the years with our programs that we've added. But really, when you break it down, when it gets complicated, it's just because we want to track those revenues and those expenses for our different programs so that we know, we can tell you exactly how much is that South Pine Transfer Station costing you and how much is the Willow River costing you and things like that. So as we march down the list, we start with our revenues. Our state score payments. So that's funds coming from the state. There's one state aid that's going to be going up a whopping couple $100, but it's going up anyways. As we kind of march down, everything's somewhat similar. Our state hazardous waste grant, I'm bumping that revenue up significantly, 50% for 2023. And that is because we will have the Willow River household hazardous waste functioning. And so my thought is we'll be bringing in a lot more hazardous waste, and your grant is specifically tied to how much you bring, how much waste you collect. And so that's why you're seeing that bump up. Our waste hauler fees, just kind of trying to get it to where I think it actually will be. So each waste hauler pays a $200 license fee in January of each year. Otherwise, our fees for service, so that's what those folks pay when they come to those transfer stations. Some things are free, but some things do cost them. And so that's what those fees for service are. And again, just trying to hone in those numbers to what we actually think they will be. And then our tax collection, that's our $10 solid waste fee. Right now, we weren't proposing to increase it at all. And so that was leaving it stable. I know in our solid waste ordinance discussion, there was some discussion of, do we not want to do that solid waste fee on commercial properties because they can't use our facilities that we currently have? Do we want to do something different with them? So I'm hopeful at some point here, we can get back to that conversation with that update of that ordinance. But right now within the budget, I have it just staying steady. And then again, refunds and reimbursements. And so that again is tied to the majority of those dollars is the paint care program. And so for those that aren't familiar with that, when you buy a gallon of paint, you pay 50 cents or $1, and then you can dispose of paint for free. And so all of the paint that we bring in at our hazardous waste facilities, we have to pay to get rid of it. However, then we get reimbursed through that paint care program. So that's what that refunds and reimbursements line item is. And that's why I have it going up, because we'll have a second facility and I would anticipate be collecting a lot more paint. Other ways as we march down the line, we've got our salaries and benefits kind of as you would expect, I think. We're not proposing any additions or anything to staffing levels. And so leaving our part-timers, so the transfer station attendants the same. And within the 2022 budget, we had already budgeted an extra hazardous waste person, thinking we were going to have that facility open this year. So that's not a new position for 2023. It's just a carryover from 2022 that we didn't end up filling. Other ways as we march down, again, benefits are what you'd expect, I think. Kind of in other line items, we've got some subtractions here and there in your travel expenses. Our insurance has gone down nicely just because we aren't insuring all those recycle sheds anymore. Because our most things are collected in dumpsters that are owned by the hauler, by the recycling hauler now. Otherwise, HHW contract services or collection and disposal, that's jumping up 25%. Which is $10,000, but again, tied to that Willow River transfer station opening. When we first opened in Pine City, we saw a huge increase and now it's kind of leveled out of use. And so I think that over the years, we maybe will be able to bring that back down slightly, but I'm going to anticipate next year, with it being the first year, that there'll be a lot of stuff coming in. Otherwise, in the HHW expenses, you see some decreases, and that is tied to this year we had budgeted for opening that new Willow River facility. So this year we had budgeted to buy the new carts and all the supplies that we needed to open that facility. And so this year we're able to for 2023, we don't need to buy those things because we're going to buy them in 2022. So some of those expenses can go down for HHW. Moving on to the North Pine Transfer Station. So everything is pretty much very stable with the North Pine Transfer Station. I think we've done a lot of lessons learned, made changes that we needed to make changes to. One thing that Caleb has been playing with is he's been able to get a skid loader into the transfer station and actually pack down some of those dumpsters. And so he's seen that that is a really good possibility if we can actually push down those dumpsters and get more in them, because then you're not paying that hauling charge so much. So that's something that we're playing with, and hopefully we'll get some more information on that, of what that could look like and how that could work. So North Pine Transfer Station, pretty much everything staying the same. You see a bump up in program expense, and literally that's like your snow plowing and things like that, because we do have a contractor that does that, and it seems to snow a lot. Unfortunately or fortunately. Moving on into the South Pine Transfer Station, we haven't had a lot of I feel like that facility is getting some traction finally. The first couple years that we operated it, I felt like people were a little bit rebelling against it because they missed their unstaffed recycle sheds. But I think as people have used it, I think they've gotten to really appreciate it and the use has gone up, which then the corresponding expenses do go up slightly. You did see some of the fees go up, so there is some revenue to help offset some of those costs that are going to be going up slightly for the South Pine Transfer Station. But when you see those costs go up, they're very minimal going up. I mean, going up $400 and things like that. So it's nothing to get terribly excited about. And then the recycling program, the last piece of this budget, that is at the Hinckley Transfer Station, people can bring like electronics or tires, and we pay for half the disposal there. And then that is also our contractor that services the recycling sites. And so like your contract services, you see that at the $86,000. And so that is literally Cloquet Recycling who services our recycling sites. Our contract with them has an increase tied to like consumer price index increases. And so I was struggling a little bit. Those numbers don't come out till December of where the consumer price index is for the next year. And so I just picked a 6% number, figuring it was going to be higher than what we've seen, but hopefully by the time December gets here, things are tamped down a little bit. Otherwise, the only other thing that I could mention is about the recycling, the garbage removal going up. That's only going up $600, but just to give you guys an idea of what that is, we do still have an unstaffed recycling location in Bruno, and it is still abused. And so that's part of our contract with that recycling, with Cloquet Recycling, is that we pay for the garbage that goes in there, goes in those sheds. And so that's literally a garbage bill for those unstaffed recycle sheds.
How much recycling is actually happening there?
It's not all garbage. Yeah, there still is there's still more recycling than garbage. And I guess I've always been very strong on liking that site because it's so far to any other site. But yet it is tough because there's a lot. I mean, there's $3,000 of garbage that goes in there.
The people at the south site, I stop in there every once in a while, and it's, everybody's happy as a clam that it's there, and they always keep it so neat. But even with staff there, every once in a while, somebody sneaks a bag of garbage into, it's like, come on, people.
Right. And a bag of garbage, if you really needed to get rid of it, was $6.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like how they drive around the corner and dump it all in Mission Creek Township instead of taking it to the recycling. Yeah, it's just sad.
The one, like, they accept brush at the Pine City or at the south one. And of course, we had a storm this summer, and it was like mountains.
Right. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So at the South Pine Transfer Station, we accept compost. And that was part of the deal. I mean, that's what the city of Pine City used the site for before we took it over. And so that was part of the deal, that we would keep the compost going, which the compost is not bad. Where we struggle is with the brush. The practice previously has always been to burn the brush. However, that's really, it's very labor intensive to burn that brush. And the last time we burnt it this spring, 3 weeks later, it relit. So it's not a good solution. So Caleb has found a chipper that's willing to do it for a somewhat reasonable price. So we're going to try that this fall.
I hope that works, because that's really what to do with it.
Right. That's really what you need to do. Just all the quotes we had gotten for someone to come in and chip it were like insane.
Yeah.
Like $10,000. And it's like, no, we can't afford that. But he found one that's pretty reasonable. So we're going to give that a whirl rather than, because the last time we ended up just hiring Jones Construction to babysit it. Because that's what Brock used to do for us. So in the end, when we get down to the solid waste bottom line, we have slightly more revenue. We do have more expenses. And so the bottom line is overall, the budget needs about $10,000 more of levy dollars. But when you talk about $10,000 on a $60,000 budget, the percentage looks very big. But it comes down to solid waste needs $10,000 more of levy dollars. All right, we're getting there. Non-departmental. So this is the kind of the catch-all in the general fund. And so as you walk down this budget, you'll see the very top one is property taxes. And you do see a $50,000 increase in property taxes, which I had kind of lied already and told you there was no property tax increases, which I guess that's not. Because there's a $50,000 cut in the elections fund that we'll talk about soon for property taxes. So I simply moved that. So if we're cutting the 50,000 in elections, I brought it to the general fund because elections is a general fund function. So yes, it looks like a $50,000 property tax increase, but it's really not because it's just moved from elections. And we'll talk about the elections one here in a moment. But otherwise, kind of as you work your way down, when I was going through my presentation, we got to that top 10 taxpayers, and I was talking about that countywide property tax and how the one company, while it looks like they pay a very small amount of property taxes, they actually pay a lot. And that's this line item, this power line taxes. And so this year in this budget, I'm estimating that to significantly go up. And we talked about this previously, but this was a last year conversation. The state had us change how we were taxing distribution lines. So previously each entity or each city or township and school district and the county all got regular property tax funds for it. However, upon reading the statute in the direction, we needed to follow what the statute said. And so then the Department of Revenue had us change to what the statute said, which said they don't pay regular property taxes. They pay this countywide property tax. So the local entity, the local city or township gets nothing. And the remainder is split between the county, the school district, and the state. So
get something.
right, and the school actually gets more. Same with us. We get more this way than what we used to when they were property tax. And that's why you see this big bump up. So it is an extra about $100,000 of revenue that we're seeing in that line item, which is helpful to us. To some of those little taxing jurisdictions, it was not helpful. But again, that's all statute driven, and that's how it should have been done all along. But the statute was read differently previously, and the direction we had received was to have it on the regular property taxes. So 2022 was the first year of that change.
Is this where it really hit like Bruno?
Right, this is the Bruno. Bruno and Denham were the top two that were hit. But I worked, like Bruno, I went to their city council meeting and I think we came up with good solutions. Yeah, and I mean, Denham, when you say that they were hard hit, again, that gets into small numbers and percentages. So I think that their cut was like $2,100, but it ended up to be like a 10% because their levy is so small. So that's the power line taxes that you see going up significantly. Again, when we were talking about top revenues, I already mentioned about the forfeited properties going down. Again, when we were talking about those top revenues, we talked about county program aid going down almost 5%, which is very disappointing. We talked about the payment in lieu of taxes going up. So that's helpful. All these indirect costs line items that you see that used to all be lumped together. However, now we have to break it out for our audit. And so those are portions of those programs that HHS runs. There's still parts of the general fund, like my office, the attorney's office, and things that support those functions. And so this is part of those dollars that when HHS gets reimbursement for those dollars. So that's what those dollars are. Plat book sales, I have jumping up slightly, and that's because jumping up $3,000 because there'll be a new plat book in 2023. We've been on kind of the schedule to do a new one every 3 years. So 2023 is the year. And so just anticipating as those new ones come out, there'll be more sales. Interest income, I struggled a little bit with that. Interest rates are really good right now. And it's fun to see them really good. And so I look back to, for example, 2019, when we had almost $300,000 of interest income. And really, interest rates are better now than they were then. And so I wanted to bump that up higher. However, we also have a good portion of our investments that were already invested in the last couple of years in some of those lower returns.
But we also refinance our big mortgages.
At low rates.
Low rates, so
Right,
we're in the interest income expense.
right.
We're better.
Yeah, so I'm feeling like our interest income will likely be slightly more than that, but I was trying to be conservative.
Yeah, we-
Had a $50,000 bump up.
In the interest categories, when we have these restricted funds, do you have to keep every one of those funds in a separate account, or can you lump them together and then distribute it?
Right, so it's all just in our regular bank account. We just have to account for it separately. And some of those restricted funds, we actually have to allocate the interest over to.
Right.
Yeah, but yet that's all just done on paper. It's all still in our same bank account.
All right.
Otherwise, I think kind of on the revenue side, things are pretty stable. Our refunds and reimbursements line. So it seems that we get rebates from MCIT sometimes for our insurance. Whenever they give us those rebates, they always say, now this is a one-time rebate.
Right.
They seem to come every year. But so it's hard to estimate that number. So I just sometimes use the previous year's number as my budget item. And so really that's what I'm doing and why I'm estimating it to go down, because of where our rebate for this year's coming in. Other ways as we run down the list, workers' comp, you see a big increase in cost, and literally that's just what we're seeing across the board is an increase in cost in workers' comp. And MCIT has their reasons behind that, that I think we hear their song and dance and when we get it. Also same with insurance. So this is like our property insurance, our liability insurance. That has the cost of that extremely bumped up this last year. And so just trying to budget that to a more realistic number as to where it should be. And then the very bottom transfers out line, that's going away. So that was, I talked about earlier, is in 2022, we put an extra $100,000 in the equipment purchases in the highway department. And now we're not going to do that in 2023. So that's why that 100,000. So overall, it's kind of nice. You see pretty much stable revenues right now, but again, we haven't done anything with property taxes. Our expenses have gone down $48,000 overall. So overall, when you're looking at this kind of catch-all budget, you're only looking at a 1.2% increase. All right, we're almost there. Land department, this one is always, in my mind, an easy budget because there's no levy dollars at all in this. This is all self-supported by land sales and timber sales. So we have Greg and Joe that do the management of the program. However, their costs get held off the top of any proceeds of sales. And so really, we do our best at estimating our costs ahead of time, but in the end, we get our costs back before we distribute any of the sale income.
Is it your salary and Ally's salary?
Correct. So there's $90,000 within the land department costs that gets transferred over to the general fund to help pay for my salary and Ally's salary for the support we do to those land sales. kind of, you've got some thicker lines going, and so that separates out those restricted funds we talked about. So the very first restricted fund is those forest roads, and the revenue source for that is literally gas tax. And so we get some gas tax dollars for those roads, and you do see some expenses that Greg's got to do to keep some of those roads up. The next kind of big bar is the timber development. And so again, that is, you guys are keeping 5% back from all the timber and land sales that go into this fund. So that's the revenue, and the expenditures are those things that Greg has to keep the land usable. So like we put in a parking lot at the Munch Township properties and things. And so that came out of that. Forfeited blight cleanup. So again, that's a withholding that we do that you guys have done by resolution from those sales. That's only from tax forfeit land sales, not from timber sales. And that's literally to address cleanup properties that we have that we get back on forfeiture. And then the last kind of bar there is that park acquisition and development. So statute says you guys can hold up to 20% back from land sales and timber sales for that. And so we started doing that in 2020. And so you can see how those numbers have grown over the years. So that hopefully when we get, we can make some traction on some of our Oberstar Trail hopes. Questions on the land department? All right, we're almost there. Elections. So some years back, 2018 was the first year that we took elections out of the general fund and made it its own thing. They made it its own tax levy. We made, and that way, when you have this every other year, even years you have elections, odd years you don't have elections. And so previously, on even years, we'd have a really high budget. On odd years, we'd have a really low budget. And it was tough for the tax levy, because some years it's like, great, you can have $60,000 back. And then the next year we want it back again. And so we separated this out so that we can hopefully have a stable tax levy every single year and not this up and down, and then have its own fund balance. And so when we started that, it was a great thought. However, then in 2019, we got hit with 4 special elections and ended up in the hole. So that didn't work out so great. We ended up in the hole, but then luckily now, as the years have gone since then, we have been able to build a fund balance. So at 12/31 of 2021, we're at about $68,000 of fund balance. We did have to spend a little bit of that, about $10,000 of that for all the new equipment purchases. But now that that's done, really that fund balance is there to help that ups and downs. And so when I looked at this, I tried to figure out where would my levy actually need to be to keep it just stable, be able to use a little bit of that fund balance, build the fund balance on the odd years. And so I came up with a $42,000 of tax levy, which is $50,000 less than last year. And so as I already mentioned, I took that $50,000 and I moved it over to the general fund, because this used to be in the general fund. So I think with looking at what the expenses will actually be in odd years, I think we'll be able to stow away the funds that we need for the next coming even year and not necessarily even dip into the fund balance very much. So again, when you look at this, it looks like a balanced budget. However, I'm actually anticipating in an odd year that there'll be a lot less expenses. But we just, on budgeting on paper, we want to make sure that they equal. Otherwise, we'd be looking at it going, oh, elections has an extra $50,000 of tax levy that can help offset the general fund, but it really doesn't, because our intention is for that to go into the reserve balance, whatever's left over. Questions on that? Last page. We're on to debt. So as we've talked about, we have our 3 bonds. Every single year we have to levy property taxes for the bond payments. We're required to levy 5% more property taxes than the bond payments are going to be. And so the purpose of that is you've got your delinquencies and you've got your ones that aren't going to be collected for a very long time. So you need to be able to have the funds to make those payments, even with those delinquencies and things. So these, you'll always see that we actually have more revenues than expenses within the debt funds. Overall, when you look at the different debt funds, I think I had it on the slide earlier, it's about $14,000 more in levy dollars that we need in 2023 than we did in 2022 to make those debt payments. But it is what it is. Our payments are very stable from year to year, and that was intentional in how we crafted them. And so you don't have all of a sudden in a year from now, we have to come up with an extra huge amount of money because we've kept them very stable, only increasing slightly from year to year. Questions on that?
So the maturity of the jail bonds is 31.
Correct. The jail bonds and the courthouse bonds are 31, and then the CIP is 32 or 33.
That's gonna get here before I know it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's.
What a relief that's gonna
It's
be
kind of-
budgeting.
That was ever on the board that year, we're gonna do the happy day.
I look forward to that year. We just have to make it there.
Yeah.
All right, that's the end of my line by line presentation. Questions or anything?
If you added all of them together, do you have a number? Increase, decrease?
Madden.
I know some percentages were high, but the dollar amount wasn't much.
So between all of them, it's about 150,000.
Okay. Heard anything on the munch? Crossing, me neither.
All right,
Thanks, Kelly.
thank you.
Awesome. Like a good breakdown.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to commissioner updates. East Central Solid Waste. Our new guy has been there a month as of the last meeting, so he seems to be doing things. He's got we bought a flare about 2 years ago to burn off the excess methane. It never has worked properly with the auto start button. And he thinks he's got a solution for that. So that's well worth it. The big concern we have is, I think it'll change in the next contract, but contract with the haulers is the amount of demolition debris that ends up at the Hinckley transfer station and the Cambridge transfer station. And our system is just not set up to handle that. And so, you know, we had a individual that wanted to start a demo landfill in Pine County and gave up on the process. But it's you know, we have a demo pit at the landfill in Mora. So we would have to ask contractors to either go there or the one in Rush City. And I know if you're going to demo a building, when it comes to that point, depending on where you're located, it's going to cost you more money because time is money, miles are money. And I understand why they want to bring it to a transfer station, but it's probably going to come to a halt in a couple of years.
So then what happens?
The people that tear down a building instead of putting it in a 30-yard roll-off and running it to the transfer station at Cambridge or Hinckley are going to have to run it to one of those demo sites.
Are there
So if you're tearing apart a building in sandstone,
Yeah, and no, are there any sites available or do we need to have a local?
there's one in Mora. At the landfill, there's a demo site there, and there's one in Rush City. That's the only two in east central Minnesota. There's one, if you get north of here, it's probably, there's one somewhere in Hermantown or someplace, but anyway. Regional library.
The conversation again was the book, and I just sent it home with Jeff Nelson. And he's going to look at it and see what he thinks is a police officer's point of view, which I'm excited that he is willing to do that. So we are meeting next Tuesday in the afternoon to discuss where to go with this book. There's the ad hoc committee, whether we're going to continue to have it on the shelf for the 10-year-olds, or if we're going to put it in the adult section where the parents can check it out to talk about sex ed with their kids. So that's really been the main, it's taken a lot of time. Lots of people attending.
Yeah, fun.
Yeah. No.
Soil and water.
JJ, I know didn't make it. He called me.
No.
Cambridge, and I didn't make it.
Law library.
It actually got changed to this Thursday.
Okay. Snake River.
That's next week.
Okay. Gun violence, public health, Safer Communities Act.
So I sat in on that when it came through that I figured it was with public health. What it ended up being, because there's been so much violence lately, there's a lot of conversations going on about what they can do to help control it. And so what it came down to was when you've got your assault rifles, just limiting how many bullets they can put into there is the big thing that they're pushing right now. And they figured if they can get that taken care of, that public health will take, and then we'll have safer communities. However, the big conversation was if you look at Chicago, they have very strict gun laws there, and the most deaths occur there. So it seems like no matter what you do to limit, people are always going to be able to get what they want. It's what we already knew.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Who did put it on?
I thought it came through, I can look up. and see
Okay,
where
you
it
can
came
just
from,
let me
but-
know. I was just curious.
Yeah, yeah.
Upcoming meetings. There's a Cattlemen's Association tour this Saturday. I don't know. I'm going to try to get to it. If anybody else is, I'm planning on attending, but otherwise read down through the list. And if you can't make a committee meeting, try to get somebody to take your place. Any other business? If not, we'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
JJ,
Yeah, big fish.
are you, is your intent to be at the August 23rd budget meeting or no?
I'm still gonna be up here. I'll be back the 26th.
Okay, so you won't be remoting in.
No, I won't have a,
Me to go to
I won't have
that?
a
I'm going to be
I
done.
won't have a location.
I'm
I'll
gonna
be
be
traveling.
Okay, that's what I needed to
But
know.
if I could still get
No
a,
big deal.
if I could still get a Zoom option, I could be there and listen in on it. I just can't provide a solid address right now.
Okay, and that's part of it is that you'd have to have a location.
Hey, Kelly.
So that we could make it on the agenda saying that it was accessible for the public to join if they wanted.
That they're doing interviews, but they were asked
But I think,
to be there. So that's what I'm going to be doing.
no, there isn't.
That's more important.
So-
Place that kind of board meeting. Budget, it's way better than it used to be.
I mean, I don't want to give up on that, Alex, but you know what? We're gonna be on.
I used to
He's traveling, so there won't be
wrap up around.
so I can't put it on the agenda that.
No, but I would still take a Zoom option. I could attend, but I just wouldn't be.
Is Andrew with the chair right now?
Yeah, yeah.
He's really not a bad guy. but he's just like-
Let me talk to Dave about it.
I was still sitting.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, and I would add that, so when Lisa's looked at
We
this,
can't get to a meeting and
he has not found the
I
ability
used
to
to have
join
a
remotely
in
as
September
a
like we had to by
commissioner
law.
without having your location. That there isn't like just listening in as an option.
AMC conference for downtown.
When he gets
Seattle.
back from his trip, we can certainly follow up again and make sure that's still
Meet up at
how he's reading the law.
Rogers Room at 5 o'clock, so we all went up for a beer.
The whole board, we have.
All right, thank
That
you.
makes sense? All right. Thank you.